What was achieved in all those struggles was independence. The colony was no longer, India was no longer a colony of Britain. They tried for a while to have another name. They called it the British Commonwealth. None of that stuff worked. Those places didn't want to be subordinated to Great Britain in any significant way, as they had been, was a fundamental change. The question arose in every one of the struggles for independence. What exactly does it mean? Yes, we are no longer legally a part of the old empire. We have fought against them. We've won in the fights, often, as I said, bitter, long, violent fights. We are now an independent country. We have our own government. We have our own currency. We have our own, etc., etc. And we sit in the United Nations, for example, as an independent, equal voting with other countries and all the rest. But the real issue was, did colonialism stop? That was the crucial question. And the answer to that is unambiguous. No, it did not. It turned out in every country that won its independence, which is most of the countries sitting in the United Nations today, were once colonies. A minority were colonizers. A majority were colonies, the subjects, the controlled spaces of the minority. In that situation, they didn't break away economically. They broke away politically, but not economically. And as I'm about to explain, if you break politically but not economically, you haven't broken. It's a bitter lesson to learn. It was bitter for all these countries, and it's bitter today because it's still being learned. Why? During the time that you were a colony, the dominant country, so let's say I'll pick up a country I talked about before, Kenya, an East African country that was for a long time a colony of Britain. Well, the British built the harbor. The British built the railways that were there. The British designed the school system, even though the vast majority of people couldn't go to school because they didn't build enough schools and they cost money and all the rest that colonialism did that I've talked about. But you left only a skeleton. You didn't leave enough resources, and the resources that were there were focused on, designed for integration with the country that was dominant. So even though you were independent, I'll give you the example of Kenya. Kenya had become an important place for the British Empire to secure a food that they needed, called coffee. Kenya to this day depends on producing and selling coffee. That's not a part of African history. That's what the British brought there. They also brought the settlers, if you recall, who pushed the African population, the Kikuyu tribe and others, off of their land to settle the British where they could run coffee plantations, forcing Africans back to work on the land taken from them to produce the coffee that profited those few settlers and the British merchants who took the coffee, processed it, and shipped it all over the world. In other words, Kenya's economy after independence, as much as before, was geared to the global capitalist market in which Britain was a very powerful player. And the same is true for French colonies, and so on and so on and so on. It is really important to understand this, that you don't become independent when you declare it. Even if you fight a bloody war to get it, you're still stuck. The United States, after our Revolutionary War and after the War of 1812, we were still dependent on producing cotton and sending it to Great Britain. Before the Revolution and after, that was the most important industry in this country. That's why slavery was so important. That's why we kept bringing slaves from Africa to the American South to produce the cotton, which continued to be sold to England because that was the lifeblood of the economy. And the United States had a formal independence, but it took them a long time to have a real economic independence. And during that time, what the British did still shaped what the United States did. The British bought that cotton, and that made the South rich, and that kept the slave trade going, and that destroyed large parts of Africa. Those things didn't stop because the United States got independent. And those kinds of things don't stop in Asia, Africa, or Latin America when they stop being a formal colony and become, an informal colony, a neo-colony, hooked in to the dominant foreign power that took them over as a colony in the first place. The struggle against colonialism and imperialism continues under neo-colonialism and neo-imperialism right to our present day.